Welcome to Mrs. Neller's notes for her double block algebra class. These are the notes for section 13.1 entitled Finding Probabilities and Odds. And today we're going to talk about how we can find the probability that an event will occur. We're also going to talk about the odds of an event occurring. And then we're going to understand and apply the basic concepts of probability and odds. Now we have to talk about some vocabulary before we get into our actual examples. And the first vocabulary word is outcome. When we're dealing with statistics, it's a lot about counting all the possible things that can happen and all the possible results that you can get. So an outcome is a possible result of an experiment. And it could be just one possible result, or it could be more than one, depending on what kind of results you're looking for. Like it could be picking a red M&M and a blue M&M out of a bag. An event is an outcome or a collection of outcomes. So an outcome is usually just one, and an event could just be one, or it could be the collection as well. And then the sample space, this is all of the possible outcomes. This is all of the possible samples, all of the possible things that could happen. So if your sample space was a bag of M&Ms, it would be all the colors and all of the total M&Ms that you had in the bag. So we're going to be using those terms a lot as we go throughout the chapter. And let's see if we can take a look at this first example here. We're going to flip a coin and roll a six-sided die. When you have just one of a pair of dice, it is called a die. And when we're flipping a coin, we're assuming that it's got a heads and a tails. Okay, so they want to know how many possible outcomes are there in the sample space. So again, the sample space is all of the possible combos, and then the outcomes are the results of the experiment. So how many results are there when you flip that coin and roll the dice, or roll the die? So the way we're going to figure this out is we're going to make a factor tree, or, well, a diagram tree. Okay, make a tree diagram. And that just helps us organize and visualize what's going on. Okay, so we're going to have a coin that we're going to flip. Excuse me, and when you flip that coin, you could either have heads or tails as your results. So this is the tree diagram that they're talking about. Okay, and then when you roll the die, you have 6 sides on your 6-sided die. It's important to know how many sides there are because there can be more than 6, but a standard die has 6 sides. So if you roll heads, then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 options, because those are the numbers on each of the sides of the die. Or if you roll tails and then roll the die, you still have those 6 options. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, oops, and 6. We'll squeeze them in there. So altogether then, if you do the heads and then roll your die, or if you do tails and then roll your die, you would have 12 possibilities. So if you flip the heads and then you get these 6 outcomes, and then you do the tails and you flip these 6 or roll these 6 outcomes, we're basically taking that 2 times the 6 to get 12. You have 2 possibilities for the coin, and then you have 6 possibilities for the die, and you multiply them together and you get 12, because there's 12 possible options altogether. So we don't have to draw that tree diagram every single time. The more and more that we do this, we'll get really comfortable with just knowing that a coin has 2 sides to it and the dice have 6 sides. Or they'll tell you that it's a 20-sided die. So, or a deck of cards has 52 cards in it. So there's a lot of that type of information that we'll see over and over and over again. But the point is that to find the possible outcomes, we multiplied the outcomes together. So now that we understand that basic principle of an event and outcomes in our sample space, we can talk about probability and then odds. And probability is a number from 0 to 1, so it could be a fraction or a decimal, that represents the likelihood or the chance that an event is going to occur. So if your probability is 0, that means you have no chance for the event to occur. It's not going to occur at all. And if your probability is 1, that's kind of like 100%. So it's a 100% chance that that event is going to happen. That event will definitely occur. Okay, so then 0 would be like 0%. And then in the middle, 0.5, that would be like 50-50, a 50% chance. And we talk about this when we talk about weather. We say there's a 0% chance of rain or a 100% chance of snow. Okay, so that means 0 would be down here, and 1 would be at the other end of the spectrum. 0.5 would be in the middle, but then there's all kinds of other decimals all along the way. There's 0.25, there's 0.75, and all the infinite number of decimals that you could have in between all of these others. Okay? But we're going to stay between 0 and 1. And you could write it as a fraction or as a decimal, because we could write it 0.5 or we could write 1/2. We could think of it as 50%. So basically what we're dealing with here with probability is we're trying to find what we want versus all of the possible outcomes. Okay, so what two events are we comparing? We're comparing what we want to what is all possible. And when we talk about this with weather, we might want a 0% chance of rain, but you have to put what you want out of all the possible chances of getting rain. And then this leads us to our theoretical and our experimental probability. So there's a little bit of a difference here, a slight difference, okay? Since our probability is comparing what we want versus all of the possible outcomes, the stuff that we want is going to be the favorable outcomes. And then when you're comparing it to all of the outcomes, that's the total possible outcomes. And there's a slight difference between theoretical probability and experimental. Experimental is the number of successes, and that's still what you want. Like if you want to flip a heads, then you would count all of the heads that you got when you were flipping your coins. But it's only out of the number of trials. So it's only out of how many experiments you actually do. So that's the difference between experimental and theoretical. Theoretical is out of the total possible outcomes, but experimental is just out of however many times you try. But they're pretty much the same thing. It's what you want out of the total. Okay, so the favorable is what you want, and then the total is in the bottom. And we use probability when we're trying to calculate the chance of getting what we want. So when there's a chance of getting whatever we want, it could be winning the lottery, it could be picking a certain type of candy out of a basket, getting a certain grade on a test. So whatever we want, whatever that favorable outcome is compared to all the possible outcomes, then that's when we're going to use probability. Odds are slightly different, and in the real world we kind of use these terms, probability and odds, we use them interchangeably, but mathematically, there's a difference between them. And odds is a ratio that compares the number of favorable events to the number of unfavorable events. So now you're not comparing it to the favorable events to all events. You're just comparing favorable and unfavorable. So it's what you want versus what you don't want. So if you're comparing what you want, the favorable, to the unfavorable, that's odds in favor. And you can also have odds against something. And that's just the inverse of the favor. So we're going to have unfavorable on the top and then favorable on the bottom. So again, it's still what you don't want versus what you want. But the order of the ratio is what makes the difference between the odds in favor or the odds against. And we use odds when we're talking about winning versus losing. And you hear about this all the time. The odds of winning the lottery are 1 in a million. So that means there's one favorable outcome and a million unfavorable outcomes where you don't win. So this is what we need to consider if you're going to um, take on some sort of gamble. You have to consider how many favorable outcomes there are versus those unfavorable outcomes. Now, in class, we're going to do an M&M activity next, where I'll hand out 2 little packets of M&Ms, and you'll count the number of each color of M&M that you have, and then you'll count up the total number of M&Ms, and then we'll go through and we'll find the probability of selecting each color. So you'll find the probability of selecting the red. So again, remember that probability is going to be the favorable out of the total. So then you would put the number of that specific color over the total number of M&Ms. And then we're also going to find the odds of selecting a certain color. So again, you would have a certain color like red, if that's what you wanted to select, over all of the not red M&Ms. Okay, so that's just a little fun in-class activity that we're going to do, and once that's all counted and tabulated, then yes, you can eat the M&Ms. Okay, but we also have some other activities that we're going to do in class because statistics is very real world, so we get to move up and get up, move around the room, and we get to do some more real world type math. It's very applicable. And so we're going to have different activity stations, and we're going to have a life spinner, like the game of life. And then we're going to have Candyland cards and 6-sided dice and then 20-sided dice. So you're going to get into little groups and you'll go around to each of the stations and then you will answer each of these questions. And luckily we can at least talk through what your answers should be if you had done this in class. And if you have the game of life, you can go ahead and look at the spinner, but there's 10 different little spots on there. And so when you're taking a look at the life spinner, we want to find the probability of landing on a 1. Well, there's only one number on there, and there's 10 total. So again, the probability is what you want out of the total. And then landing on an even number, it's got all the numbers from 1 through 10, so you could count and see how many of them are even. Oh, I don't like when it slides around like that. There we go. So you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my goodness. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So you could go through and you could count how many evens, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. That's how many are even. So there's 5 altogether out of the 10 possible, and that would reduce down to a half. And then there are colors as well on the life spinner. So you have to actually look at the life spinner here and see which ones are yellow and which ones are orange. But actually that there are 3 out of the total 10 that are shaded in a orange or yellow color. So we would have 3 of that color out of the 10 total possible. And then there's some question about the odds as well. Now again, remember we're still dealing with 10 total spaces. And here we want to land on a number that's 8 or larger. So that means we could have 8, 9, or 10. So there's 3 options then that are 8, 9, or 10. They're 8 or larger. But now remember, odds is what we want out of what we don't want. So if we have a total of 10 and there's 3 that we want, that means there's 7 that we don't want. So then the odds will be 3 out of 7. And landing on an odd number, we counted before how many evens there were. There's 5 evens and then there's 5 odds. So landing on an odd number, there's 5 of them. And again, the stuff that we don't want, the evens, that would be 5. And you do want to reduce that down to 1. Okay. And then landing on a blue or green shade, again, you'd have to look at the actual spinner in class and see how many are blue or green. But there's actually 4 that are blue or green, so that's what we want. And then everything else that we don't want, there's 6, because 4 taken away from 10 gets you 6. And then we do want to reduce that to 2/3. Okay, so then we would say the odds of landing on a blue or a green shade is 2 to 3. All right, the other activity we're going to have is Candyland cards. If you've ever played the game Candyland, they have cards that have either a single square or they have cards that have 2 squares on them and they're different colors, or sometimes they have little characters on them. So in class, I'll have a set of those cards. And all together, there are 64. That's our total. There are 64 cards total. And you'll have to go through and take some time in your group and you'll have to count how many of them are single cards and how many of them are double cards. And if you go through and you count how many are single, then you have to also select how many are red. And there's only 6 out of the 64 that are going to have a single red square on them. So again, remember, probability is what we want out of the total. So we would put the 6 out of the 64. And then yes, we do have to reduce that to 3 over 32. We're going to divide both of those by 2. And then you would count how many double green cards there are. So that means it would be a card that has 2 green squares. And there's actually 3 of those. So we would put the 3 over the 64. And that I can't reduce. And then drawing any orange card, again, you'd have to go through and you'd count how many single oranges or double oranges. And altogether there's 9. And again, that's out of your total of 64. And that we can't reduce. And then you'll have some questions about the odds as well. There are character cards in the set. There's actually 6 different character cards. So now remember, odds is what we want out of what we don't want. So if there's 64 altogether, and you take those 6 away, that means there's 58 that we don't want. So 6 of the cards have characters, 58 don't. And then we could reduce that to 3 over 29. And then purple cards, it says any purple card would want to be drawn. So that could be a single or a double. So you count all those up and there's actually 10 of them. So there's 10 that we want. And if there's 64 altogether, that means there's 54 left over that we don't want. So then again, we would divide that and reduce it down. So we would get 5 out of 27. And then the odds of drawing a double blue card. Again, you'd have to go through and you'd have to count, and there are 4 double blues. And if there's 64 altogether, that means there's 60 other cards that we don't want. So that's a 1 to 15 odds. So the odds in favor of drawing that double blue card are 1 out of 15. So in a perfect scenario, if you drew 15 cards, one of them would be a double blue. But randomness that we're going to talk about in the future makes that not always happen. Okay, but that's what that means, the odds. All right, then our next little station is where you have a pair of six-sided dice. So you're going to find the probability of rolling the same number on both dice. So the only way that that could happen is if you had a 1 and a 1, a 2 and a 2, a 3 and a 3, and so on. And there's 6 numbers, 1 through 6, on each side of the dice. And these aren't trick dice. They're not weighted differently so that they roll differently, okay? So there's 6 possible combos that you could have then. And here's the tricky part. We have to figure out how many possible combinations there could be. And this is like what we did in the very first example, where if you roll one dice, there's 6 options, and if you roll the other one, there's another 6 options. So altogether, that's 36 total. So there's 36 total options when you roll 2 six-sided die. And that's just a common thing in statistics that you'll see a lot. And of course, we want to reduce that to 1 over 6. And now we want to roll a sum of 7. So this is going to require some thought because you have to think of all the different combinations that could get you to 7. So if you rolled a 1 and a 6, that could add up to 7. And you could also roll a 6 and a 1. And then if you added a 2 and a 5, that could add up to 7. And the same thing if you rolled a 5 and then a 2, that would add up to 7. And then 3 and 4, or if you rolled 4 and 3. So you do want to count those other options, because when you roll the first die and get a 1, and then roll the second die and get a 6, order sometimes matters and sometimes it doesn't. So in statistics, we just want to be very careful about how we count things. So rolling a 1 and a 6 and then a 6 and a 1, those are 2 different options because you have your first die and then your second die. So the order that you're rolling the numbers in counts as another option. So that means there's 6 total options out of the 36 that could get us a sum of 7. And we'll reduce that to 1 out of 6. And then rolling a sum of 2, there's really only one way we could do that. We could roll a 1 and a 1, and technically we could also roll a 1 and a 1. So if the first die is a 1 and then the second die is a 1, or if the second die is a 1 and the first one, oh, what am I thinking? No, never mind. That's the same thing. So that's the tricky part with statistics, is that if you roll the 1 and then the other one is a 1, that is the only way that that combo can happen. There's only one chance that that will happen. So there's 1 out of 36. Okay? So if the first die is a 1 and the second die is a 1, that's a 1-1 combo. There's only one way that that can happen. All right, and then we're going to talk about some of the odds. So we're going to find the odds of rolling the same number on both dice. So that means you'd want a 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6. So again, there's only 6 ways that that could happen, but that's what you want out of what you don't want, which is 30. So then that reduces to 1 over 5. And now we're going to find the odds of rolling a sum of 12. And there's only one way you can get a sum of 12, and that's if you roll a 6 and a 6. So if the first die is a 6 and the second die is a 6, you can't have an option where you roll the other one is a 6 and then the other one is another 6. That doesn't make any sense here. So there's one option out of the 35 that we don't want. And then for rolling a sum of 9, there's pretty much a limited number of combos here. We could do 3 and 6, or we could do 6 and 3 because the numbers are different here. Or we could roll a 4 and a 5, or then a 5 and then a 4. So those are our 4 possible outcomes that you could have for rolling a sum of 9. So there's 4 that we want out of the 32 left over that we don't want. So again, remember, odds is what you want out of what you don't want. And that we could reduce down to 1 over 8. And then the last activity station is a 20-sided die, which you may or may not have seen. But it's a die that has 20 sides to it, so there's numbers 1 through 20. So we're going to find the probability of rolling a 6. Well, there's only one out of the whole 20. Rolling an odd number, if you want to list out all of the numbers from 1 through 20 and then count up how many of them are odd, there's actually 10 out of the 20 that are odd, so that's 1/2. Oh my goodness. What is going on with this marker? There we go. And then for rolling a 3 or smaller, you could roll a 1 or a 2 or a 3 to satisfy that. So there's 3 possibilities out of the 20. And then for the sum of the odds questions, the odds of rolling a 5, again, there's only one side that has a 5, but now this is odds, so we want to compare it to what we want out of what we don't want. So that's going to be 1 out of 19, because there were 20 total. So you take the 1 away from the 20, and you get the 19. Rolling an even number, again, there's 10 that are even, so that means there's 10 left over that are odds. So that would be 1. And then for part C here, we want to roll a 12 or larger. So you could write it out 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and count them all up. And there's 9 numbers that are 12 or larger. And that means that 9 taken away from 20 would be 11 left over that are not larger than 12 or equal to 12. Okay, so that should be the answers that we get as we go through our activities in class. And a couple closing questions then about these concepts, just to make sure that we're all on the same track, whether or not you got the fractions correct for the activities or not. What is the numerator of a probability fraction? That is the favorable outcomes. That's all the stuff that you want. And the denominator for a probability will be the total, all the possible outcomes. The numerator of an odds fraction, if it's odds in favor, that will be your favorable. And then the denominator of an odds fraction then would be your non-favorable. And again, this is as long as it's odds in favor. If it was odds against, then we would have the not favorable in the numerator and then the favorable in the denominator. But usually when they just say, what are the odds of something happening, they want the favorable over the non-favorable. So the homework for tonight then will be a worksheet. Remember, none of this is in your book. This is all out of the algebra book, the chapter 13 from the algebra book. So we will get printed notes in class, and if you miss something, make sure you either look at the in-class notes on the class website or watch this video. And then if you have questions on the worksheet, come on in and see me before school.